I thought Sunday dinner would be the usual slow humiliation, while my sister glowed and I shrank. Then my father called me worthless in front of everyone, and I realized he was not just insulting me but rewriting me. 3 weeks later, an unknown number lit up my phone. The voice on the other end did not ask if I was free. She simply said, "The senator needs to meet you tonight. My name is Harper Brooks, and for the last 10 years, I have existed in my family's ecosystem as a cautionary tale, a smudge on the pristine glass of their suburban perfection. If you asked my father, he would say I was present at Sunday dinner. But the truth was that I was merely occupying a chair at the far end of a mahogany table that cost more than my first car. The dining room in our Naperville, Illinois home was designed to intimidate rather than welcome. It was a space of aggressive beige tones and heavy drapery, illuminated by a crystal chandelier that was far too large for the ceiling and cast a light so bright it felt surgical. It exposed every pore, every flaw, and every drop of sweat on the upper lip of a guest who realized they had used the wrong fork. The room was packed tight this Sunday. Aunts, uncles, and cousins were squeezed in shoulder to shoulder, their voices rising in a cacophony that sounded like joy but felt like competition. Everyone was talking over everyone else. They laughed too loudly at mediocre jokes and nodded too vigorously at banal statements, creating a wall of noise that they hoped would cover the cruelty that always sat at the center of our family gatherings. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my knuckles turning white, trying to make myself smaller. My father, Robert, held court at the head of the table. He was a man who believed that volume and posture were substitutes for actual character. Tonight, his face was flushed with the specific intoxication of social climbing. He spent the entire meal constructing a shrine to my younger sister, Brooke. She sat to his right, glowing in the way that people do when they have never been told no. Her hair was a perfect cascade of blonde waves. Her dress was a tasteful shade of cream that cost $600, and her smile was fixed in place like it had been pinned there. Dad raised his wine glass for the third time in 20 minutes. He looked around the table, ensuring he had the room's absolute attention before he spoke. "Brooke, you have outdone yourself with the floral arrangements for the rehearsal," he announced, his voice booming. "It is perfect taste, just perfect. But then again, I never worry about you. You have always understood that excellence is in the details. A perfect future requires perfect preparation." He did not look at me when he said it, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Brooke was the success. I was the rough draft that had been discarded. Beside Brooke sat the centerpiece of the evening, her fiancé, Ethan Kincaid. Ethan was everything my father had ever wanted in a son, mostly because his last name carried the weight of a winning lottery ticket. Ethan had the kind of polished manners that could not be learned, only inherited. He had an old money smile, the kind that said he had never worried about a utility bill in his life. He sat with a relaxed slouch that my father would have criticized in anyone else, but on Ethan, Dad viewed it as the casual confidence of the elite. My father loved saying Ethan's last name. He chewed on it. He savored it, and more than that, he loved the name of the man who gave it to him. "Senator Miles Kincaid will be at the wedding," my father said, repeating the phrase for perhaps the 5th time since the appetizers were served. He said it like scripture. He said it like a magic spell that could transform our upper-middle-class striving into genuine power. Senator Miles Kincaid will be attending. Every time he said it, his eyes darted around the table, cataloging who reacted. He wanted to see the envy in my Uncle Mark's eyes. He wanted to see the impressed nod from our neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who had been invited solely to witness our ascent. He treated the senator's attendance not as a guest arriving to celebrate a marriage, but as a coronation. I glanced down at my wrist, checking the time. It was 12 minutes past 5 in the evening. I had been here for exactly 1 hour and 14 minutes. And I was already calculating the minimum amount of time required before I could claim a headache or a work emergency and escape back to the city. I cut a piece of roast beef into a tiny, manageable square, pushing it around my porcelain plate to make it look like I was eating. The meat was cold, The gravy had formed a skin. The conversation at the head of the table shifted from general praise to the practical logistics of the event. This was my father's favorite sport. He loved the optics of an event more than the event itself. He began discussing the guest list with the intensity of a general planning a tactical strike. "We need to ensure the seating chart reflects the kind of family that should be visible at a political wedding," Dad said, slicing into his steak with aggressive precision. "The senator is going to be bringing his chief of staff and several donors. We cannot have any loose ends. The visuals need to be immaculate." Brooke nodded in agreement, sipping her sparkling water. "We are keeping the reception tight." "Dad, Ethan and I agree. Only the people who really matter to our future." I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. I knew that tone. It was the tone they used when they were pruning the hedges, cutting away the dead weight to make the garden look respectable for the neighbors. I kept my eyes on my plate, hoping that if I remained still enough, the eye of Sauron would pass over me. But the silence that followed was too long. It was heavy. I looked up. My father had set down his fork. He did not place it gently on the tablecloth. He dropped it with a metallic clatter against the china, hard enough to make the entire room flinch. The conversation between my cousins died instantly. The clinking of silverware stopped. My father was looking right at me. His expression was not angry. It was something worse. It was disappointed, resolved, and entirely devoid of warmth. It was the face of a man who is about to deliver a verdict that he has convinced himself is for the greater good. "Harper," he said. I straightened my spine, bracing myself. "Yes, Dad, we have been reviewing the final numbers for the head table and the immediate family photos," he said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, which made the words that followed land with the force of a physical blow. "We have decided that it would be best if you did not attend the ceremony or the reception." The air left the room. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving my skin cold and prickly. I blinked, sure that I had misheard him. The room was absolutely silent now. Even the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed to cease. "I am sorry," I said, my voice sounding thin and foreign to my own ears. "I do not understand. You do not want me at my sister's wedding." Dad sighed, leaning back in his chair as if I were being difficult on purpose. He laced his fingers together over his stomach. "It is a matter of optics. Harper, this is not just a party. This is a networking event for the Kincaid family. It is a highly sensitive political environment. Senator Kincaid is vetting everyone he is associated with." I looked at Brooke. She was studying the tablecloth, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at my mother. She was staring into her wineglass, swirling the red liquid round and round, disappearing into the vortex so she would not have to parent me. "I am your daughter," I said. I felt a surge of something hot and sharp in my chest. "I am not dangerous. I am not a criminal. Why would I be a problem?" "Because you are embarrassing," my father said. The word hung there, suspended above the roast beef and the expensive wine. It was a simple sentence, delivered without malice, stated as a plain fact like the weather report. He continued before I could recover. "Look at you. Harper, you are 27 years old. You drive a beat-up car. You live in a shoebox apartment in a bad part of Chicago. You have no career to speak of. You have no husband. You have no prospects. When people ask what you do, we have to change the subject." "That is not true," I said, my voice trembling now. "I have a job. I work for the government." "You are a low-level clerk," Dad interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "You push paper in some basement bureau that nobody has ever heard of. It is not exactly something we can boast about to a United States senator, is it?" I gripped the edge of the table. My job was not a clerkship. My job was sensitive. My job was vital. But I had never told them the details because my work required discretion, and my family required headlines. I had spent 5 years protecting my privacy, and now that privacy was being weaponized against me, "I can dress up," I said, hating the desperation in my voice. "I can buy a new dress. I will sit in the back. I will not talk to the senator. No." my father said. He picked up his wine glass again, swirling it. It is too much of a risk. You have a way of dimming the room. Harper, you project failure. We cannot have that energy near Ethan and Brooke on their big day. We need people who add value, people who belong in that world. I looked at Ethan. He was the stranger here. Technically, he was the one who was taking my sister away. He sat there in his expensive suit, watching this dismantling of a human being with a look of mild discomfort, like he was watching a waiter drop a tray of drinks. He did not say a word. He did not intervene. He just let it happen. "Dad, please," I said. "This is family." My father looked at me then. Really looked at me. His eyes were hard, flinty, and completely closed off. "Stop begging. Harper," he said. "It is pathetic." I opened my mouth to argue, to scream, to tell him that family is supposed to mean more than a photo opportunity. I wanted to tell him that I was a human being, not a prop that had failed its audition. But he cut me off. He leaned forward, his face hardening, and he landed the word in front of everyone like he was driving a nail into a coffin. "You are worthless. Harper." The word hit the center of the table and shattered everything. Worthless. He did not shout it. He said it with a terrifying finality. He said it as if he had run the numbers, done the audit, and this was the only possible conclusion. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was a physical weight. It pressed against my eardrums. It suffocated the air in the room. I looked around the table, scanning the faces of the people who shared my DNA. My mother did not look up. She took a long, trembling sip of her wine. My sister Brooke, the golden child, the perfect bride, kept her eyes fixed on her engagement ring, twisting the diamond around her finger, over and over again. My uncles, my aunts, my cousins, people I had bought Christmas gifts for, people I had babysitted for, people I had known my entire life, they all looked away. They studied the crown molding. They adjusted their napkins. They found sudden fascination in the pattern of the rug. Not one person spoke. Not one person said, "Robert, that is too far." Not one person said, "She is your daughter." I sat there, frozen, the echo of the word bouncing around my skull. Worthless. My father picked up his fork and knife again. He cut another piece of steak, looking satisfied, as if he had finally cleared a blockage in a pipe and the water could now flow freely. "Now," he said to the room at large, his voice returning to its jovial boom. "Regarding the transportation for the senator, we need to ensure the limousine service is briefed on the security protocols." The conversation resumed, just like that. The noise rose up again to cover the cruelty. They talked about limousines. They talked about flowers. They talked about the perfect future. I sat at the end of the table, perfectly still. While the realization washed over me, I was not just uninvited, I was erased. And the man who had just erased me was already asking for someone to pass the salt. I did not throw my wine glass. I did not flip the table. I did not scream at my father until my throat was raw. Nor did I weep into my napkin to give them the satisfaction of my tears. If I had done any of those things, they would have known how to handle me. They would have sighed and exchanged glances that said, "There she goes again, the unstable daughter, the emotional wreck." They would have comforted each other for having to endure my outburst. Instead, I did something that terrified them. I went quiet. I placed my napkin on the table, folding it into a neat, sharp rectangle next to my plate. I pushed my chair back. The legs of the chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh, dry sound that cut through the sudden silence like a knife. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. I looked at my father, who was still holding his fork, his mouth slightly open, waiting for the explosion that never came. I looked at Brooke, who was staring at me with wide, panicked eyes, sensing a shift in the atmosphere she could not name. I picked up my purse. I did not say goodbye. I did not say I was sorry. I simply turned around and walked out of the dining room. My footsteps echoed in the hallway. I could hear the collective intake of breath behind me. the suspended animation of a family that realized the script had been burned. As I reached the front door, I heard my mother's voice, high and tremulous, call out my name. Harper. Wait. I did not wait. I opened the heavy oak door, stepped out into the cool evening air of Naperville, and pulled the door shut behind me with a solid, definitive click. It was the sound of a vault closing. The walk to my car felt like floating. My heart was not racing. It was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm, like a war drum. I got into my sedan, a 5-year-old model with a scratch on the rear bumper that my father liked to point out every time I visited, and turned the ignition. By the time I backed out of the driveway, my phone had already lit up 3 times. I did not look at it. I tossed it onto the passenger seat and merged onto the street, leaving the manicured lawns and the 2-story colonials behind me. The drive back to Chicago usually took 45 minutes, but tonight the traffic was light. As I drove, the phone kept vibrating against the leather of the seat. It buzzed like an angry insect. I knew exactly who was calling. My mother, trying to smooth things over. Brooke, trying to manage the damage to her evening. Maybe even my father, calling to demand I come back and apologize for being insulted. I let it ring. I let the screen light up the dark interior of the car, over and over again, until the battery eventually surrendered, or they did. I did not care which came first. I drove toward the skyline, watching the city rise up from the flat expanse of the Midwest like a jagged electrical circuit. I lived in a neighborhood that my parents referred to as transitional, a polite code word they used to mean dangerous and poor. They hated coming to visit me. They complained about the parking. They complained about the graffiti on the mailbox. They complained that the building was old and lacked a doorman. They saw my life as a series of failures, a collection of compromises made by a woman who could not quite cut it in the real world. I parked on the street, grabbed my bag, and walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The space was dark, quiet, and meticulously organized. It was not the chaotic den of a struggler. It was the sanctuary of a monk. I turned on the lamp by the window. The light revealed a room that was sparse but intentional. There was no clutter. There were no piles of unpaid bills. The furniture was mid-century modern. Authentic vintage pieces I had restored myself, not cheap reproductions. On the wall, framed in simple black wood, were maps of cities I had visited alone: Tokyo, Berlin, Buenos Aires. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window, looking down at the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. My family had a favorite story about me. It was a comfortable story, one they told themselves to make their own anxieties manageable. In their version of reality, I was the less successful sister. I was the one who never grew up properly. I was the one who drifted from job to job, barely making ends meet, lacking the ambition or the pedigree to ascend to their level. They believed I was jealous of Brooke. They believed I was intimidated by my father. They believed I was small. They needed me to be small. If I was small, then they were big. If I was a failure, then their success was not just luck or privilege, but a moral virtue. I took a sip of water. The cold liquid felt good against my throat. The truth was something I had learned a long time ago: when you do not advertise your life, people will fill the silence with whatever makes them feel superior. I had let them fill the silence for years. I had let them paint their portrait of Harper the disappointment, Harper the clerk, Harper the mess. I never corrected them. I never fought back, because correction requires disclosure, and my life belonged to me. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30. I went for a run along the lakefront, watching the sun bleed orange and pink over the gray water. I showered, dressed in a charcoal suit that was tailored to within a millimeter of perfection, and drove to work. My office building was in the Loop, a heavy slab of limestone and glass that looked like every other building in the financial district. There was no sign on the door. There was no logo in the lobby. There were no bragging rights on the internet. You could Google the address, and you would find a generic listing for a logistics holding company or a vague consulting firm. I swiped my badge at the turnstile. The security guard, a former Marine named Lewis, who never smiled at anyone, gave me a sharp nod. Morning, Ms. Brooks. Good morning, Lewis. I took the elevator to the 24th floor. The doors opened into a space that hummed with a quiet, lethal intensity. This was not a place for social climbers. This was not a place for optics. I worked for the Office of Financial Integrity. It was a bureau that did not officially exist on most public org charts. Buried deep within the Treasury Department's budget under miscellaneous oversight. We were the people the government called when money disappeared, and the people who took it were too powerful for the FBI to touch without causing a panic. My job was not clerical. My job was not to push paper. I was a senior forensic analyst with level 12 clearance. My specialty was sovereign wealth extraction and high-level corporate embezzlement. I spent my days tracking digital footprints across 3 continents, untangling shell companies that were designed to look like legitimate charities, and finding the one mistake that arrogant men always made. I walked to my office, a corner suite with a view of the river. Though I kept the blinds drawn, my desk was clean. 3 monitors sat in a semicircle, glowing with streams of data. I sat down and logged in. My salary was nearly $300,000 a year, not including the performance bonuses that were paid out from a discretionary fund. I had a retirement portfolio that would have made my father choke on his steak. I had turned down offers from Goldman Sachs and private intelligence firms that would have paid double, because I did not want to help rich men get richer. I wanted to catch them. My mentor, Daria Knox, was already standing at my door, holding 2 cups of black coffee. She was a woman in her 60s with hair the color of steel wool and eyes that could read a tax return like a murder weapon. "Rough weekend?" she asked, placing the coffee on my desk. I took the cup. You could say that. My father disinvited me from my sister's wedding. Daria raised an eyebrow. "The one marrying the Kincaid boy?" "Yes. Why?" "Optics," I said, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. "He said I was worthless." Daria snorted. It was a dry, harsh sound. "If he knew what you did last month with the Cayman accounts, he would be asking you for a loan." I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. "He thinks I'm a clerk." "Keep it that way," Daria said. "Civilians get weird when they know the truth. They like the fantasy that the world is organized and safe. They do not like knowing that people like us are the only thing standing between the economy and a total freefall." She tapped the edge of my desk. "We have a new file, flagged by the algorithm at 4 a.m. Suspicious transfers out of a foundation in D.C. It looks messy." I put my coffee down and turned to my monitors. "Send it over." As the file downloaded, I watched the progress bar fill up 10%, 50%, 100%. I thought about the dinner last night. I thought about the way my father had looked at me, with that mix of pity and disdain. I thought about Brooks' perfect engagement and the senator's perfect attendance. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old urge, the urge to drive back to Naperville, throw my badge on the dining room table, and show them my bank statements. I wanted to tell them that the President of the United States had read a briefing I wrote 2 weeks ago. I wanted to tell them that while they were planning a wedding, I was preventing a currency collapse. I wanted to see their jaws drop. I wanted to see the respect in their eyes that I had starved for since I was a child. But I pushed the thought away. It was a childish desire. It was vanity, and in my line of work, vanity was a liability. If I told them who I really was, I would lose the one thing that made me effective: my invisibility. My family's ignorance was my camouflage. As long as they thought I was nothing, they would never ask me questions. They would never look too closely at where I went or who I met. I realized then, as I opened the encrypted file and began to scan the rows of transaction codes, that the insult my father had hurled at me was not actually about my value. He had called me worthless because he did not know how to value anything that did not serve him. He measured worth in applause, in votes, in social standing. He could not conceive of a power that operated in the dark. The insult was not that I was empty. The insult was that after 27 years, my own father had never bothered to look at me long enough to see what was actually there. He had built a mannequin, named it Harper, and was now disappointed that the plastic doll could not impress a senator. I was not the mannequin. I typed in my password, my fingers moving across the keyboard with the muscle memory of a virtuoso. The screen filled with numbers, names, and dates. This was my world. Here, I was not the embarrassing daughter. Here, I was the predator. I focused on the screen. The data made sense. The numbers did not lie. The world outside might be full of noise and cruelty and people who needed to feel tall by making others feel small. But in here, there was only the truth. I took a deep breath, letting the cold logic of the investigation settle over me like armor. I was ready to work, and I was glad. For the first time, that my family thought I was nobody. It meant they would never see me coming. The silence I had created did not last. It held for exactly 48 hours, a brief ceasefire before the enemy regrouped and launched a counteroffensive. They did not come with apologies. They came with hooks, sharp and barbed, designed to snag my guilt and drag me back into the formation I had just broken. It began on Tuesday evening. I was in my apartment, sitting on the floor with a stack of case files spread out on the rug, cross-referencing shell company directors with known money launderers. The building intercom buzzed. I ignored it. I was not expecting a delivery, and anyone I actually wanted to see would have texted me first. It buzzed again, long and insistent, a sound that drilled into the quiet focus of my living room. Then my cell phone rang. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, there was a knock at my front door. I froze. My building had a security door at the entrance, which meant someone had either let her in or she had tailed a neighbor through the vestibule before the lock engaged. I walked to the door but did not unlock it. I looked through the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted her features, but there was no mistaking the beige trench coat and the look of tragic martyrdom plastered across her face. My mother stood in the hallway, clutching her purse with both hands like a shield. "Harper." She called out. Her voice was soft, the special octave she reserved for when she wanted to bypass logic and aim directly for the heartstrings. "I know you are in there. Please open the door." I rested my forehead against the cool wood of the door. I did not slide the deadbolt. "Go home, Mom," I said. She stepped closer to the wood. "Harper, please. Your father is beside himself. We just want to talk." He did not mean it like that. I closed my eyes. It was the family motto. The universal solvent they used to wash away every cruel thing that had ever happened in our house. He did not mean it like that. It was a phrase that demanded I surrender my reality and replace it with theirs. I spoke clearly through the door. What did he mean then? There was silence in the hallway. I could hear the hum of the elevator down the hall and the faint sound of a television from the apartment next door. "Mom," I said again, "if he did not mean that I am worthless, what exactly did he mean? Tell me the specific definition he intended to use." She did not answer. She could not answer because there was no other interpretation. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. "He is under a lot of pressure," she finally said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The wedding, the senator. You know how he gets when he wants everything to be perfect. He just wants what is best for the family. What is best for the family is for me to not exist." I said, "That is what he said." "Harper, do not be dramatic." "I am not being dramatic," I said. "I am being precise. I am not opening the door. Mom, please leave before the neighbors call the police." I stood there for 5 minutes after her footsteps faded down the hallway. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of holding a boundary I should have erected 10 years ago. That was the first wave. The second wave was digital. Brooke sent a text message the next morning while I was on the train to work. I read it on the screen without unlocking my phone. "Harper, seriously. Mom came home crying. I know you're hurt. But let's not ruin the happiest time of my life. We can figure this out. Just call Dad." It was a masterclass in public relations. In 3 sentences, she had managed to make me the aggressor, center her own happiness, and dismiss the insult completely. She did not say, "I am sorry Dad hurt you." She said, "Let's not ruin the happiest time of my life." It was not a plea for reconciliation. It was a cease and desist order. She was managing a crisis, and I was the leak that needed to be plugged. I deleted the thread. By the time I reached my desk at the agency, my email inbox contained a message from my father. The subject line was simply Sunday. I opened it. Bracing myself for an apology I knew would not come, the email was 3 paragraphs long. It was written in the same tone he used when disputing a charge on his credit card statement. He did not address me as Dear Harper. He just started writing. I think we need to de-escalate the emotions from Sunday night. My comments regarding the wedding attendance were made strictly from a strategic standpoint regarding the guest list and the specific dynamic the senator expects. It was about optics, not affection. You took a practical decision and made it personal. We are a family, and families support the team's objective. I expect you to be reasonable. I read it twice. It was a justification disguised as an explanation. He was not sorry he had called me worthless. He was sorry I had reacted to it. He was reframing the abuse as a strategic standpoint, as if degrading his daughter was a necessary tactical maneuver in the campaign for social climbing. He wanted me to agree that my humiliation was a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of the Kincaid alliance. I did not reply. I dragged the email into a folder I had named Evidence, though I did not yet know what case I was building. The pressure campaign escalated over the next 48 hours. The extended family joined in. My phone began to ping with messages from aunts and cousins I had not spoken to since Christmas. They were fishing expeditions, thinly veiled as concern. Aunt Carol texted, "Thinking of you. Honey, your mom sounded so upset on the phone. Is everything okay, Cousin Mike? Who only called when he needed money. Sent a message via social media. Heard you stormed out of dinner. Brutal. What do you even do now? Are you still at that temp agency?" They were not checking on me. They were gathering intelligence. They wanted to know if I had cracked. They wanted to know if the black sheep had finally wandered off the edge of the cliff so they could shake their heads and say they saw it coming. I kept working. It is easier to face facts than faces. At the office, the air was cool and filtered. The lights were steady. The data on my screens obeyed the laws of mathematics and logic. I threw myself into the charity investigation. I tracked a series of wire transfers from a donor-advised fund in Virginia to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. The numbers were clean, precise lines of code that told a story of greed without any of the messy emotional manipulation of a family dinner. I was staring at a spreadsheet, my eyes burning, when Daria Knox stopped by my desk. She leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed, watching me. "You are typing like you are trying to punch a hole in the keyboard," she said. I stopped, flexing my fingers. "I am just focused." Daria walked into the room and closed the door behind her. The click of the latch was the only sound in the office. She sat in the chair opposite my desk and looked at me with that unnerving X-ray stare that made billionaires sweat during depositions. "Your mother called the front desk," Daria said. I felt the blood drain from my face. "She did what?" "She tried to get through to you. Lewis at security stopped her. She told him it was a family emergency. She was very persistent. Lewis told her that without an appointment or a badge, she could not come past the turnstiles." I put my head in my hands. "I am so sorry." "Daria, it will not happen again. I will change my number." Daria waved her hand dismissively. "I do not care about the distraction. Harper, we have handled worse than a suburban mother in a trench coat. I care about the fact that you look like you are waiting for a bomb to go off." I looked up at her. "They are relentless. They want me to apologize for being insulted. They want me to come back and take my place at the kids' table so they can feel like a good family again." Daria nodded slowly. She looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, gray and steel under the winter sky. "You know why they are doing this? Do you not?" she asked. "Because they are controlling," I said. "Because they are narcissists." "No," she said, turning back to me. "Because you are the mirror." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "They love the version of you that makes them feel tall," Daria said. Her voice was not kind, but it was true. It was the clinical truth of a diagnosis. Every family has an ecosystem. Your father needs to be the successful patriarch. Your sister needs to be the golden child. But those roles only exist in contrast to something else. They need someone to be the failure. They need someone to be the mess, if you are not the mess. Harper, then they have to look at themselves, and they are terrified of what they will see. I sat back in my chair, the words sinking in. You left. Daria continued. You walked out. You refused to play the role. That is why they are panicking. It is not because they miss you. It is because without you there to look small, they do not know how to feel big. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. Do not let them in. Harper, not because of the job, but because once you see the game, you can never go back to being a piece on the board. She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing the truth and living through it were two different things. 2 weeks before the wedding, the final blow landed. It came from a cousin named Jessica, a woman who lived for drama and disguised it as loyalty. She called me on a Thursday night. I made the mistake of answering, thinking it might be related to the mail I still received at my parents' address. Harper, Jessica said, her voice breathless. I felt like I had to tell you. I did not want you to hear it from anyone else. Hear what? I asked, tightening my grip on the phone. I was at the country club today, Jessica said. Your dad was there having lunch with some of the groomsmen and a few business partners. I was at the next table. They were talking about the wedding, and I asked, someone asked where you were. She said, they asked why you were not in the bridal party. I waited. The silence on the line was heavy with the delight she was trying to suppress. Your dad told them you were unwell, Jessica said. He told them you have been struggling with some mental health issues for years. He said you were unstable and that you have always been pathologically jealous of Brooke. He said they had to keep you away from the wedding for everyone's safety because you threatened to cause a scene. The room seemed to tilt sideways. He said what? I whispered. He said you are unstable. Harper. He was sighing and shaking his head, acting like it was this great tragedy he has to manage. Everyone was looking at him with so much sympathy. He told them he has been paying for your therapy, but nothing is working. I ended the call without saying goodbye. I sat on my sofa, the phone slipping from my hand onto the cushion. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that was deeper than anger. It was a glacial clarity. I had thought they were just excluding me. I thought they were just embarrassed by my lack of status, but it was more calculated than that. They were not just erasing me, they were rewriting me. My father was not just protecting the wedding from my presence. He was using my absence to build a new scaffolding for his own martyrdom. He was painting a picture of a benevolent father dealing with a crazy, jealous daughter. He was turning his cruelty into a story of his own suffering. He was destroying my reputation to protect his optics. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I thought about Daria's words. They love the version of you that makes them feel tall. My father had realized that he could not just have a daughter who was a failure. That was not enough anymore. To explain why he had cut me out, he needed me to be a villain. He needed me to be unstable. I placed my hand against the cold glass. They were preparing a story for why I deserved it. They were salting the earth so that even if I tried to speak, no one would believe me. I went back to my desk. I sat down in front of my computer. I opened the folder marked evidence. I looked at the email from my father. I looked at the text from Brooke. I was done being sad. I was done being hurt. If they wanted a version of me that was dangerous, I thought, staring at the blinking cursor, I would not give them the unstable daughter they invented. I would give them something much worse. I would give them the truth. It was a Tuesday, and the clock on my stove read 11:42 at night. The city of Chicago was never truly quiet, but the specific frequency of the noise changed after midnight. The heavy commercial traffic died down, replaced by the solitary hum of taxis and the distant wail of sirens that sounded like they were mourning something. I was sitting at my kitchen island, the blue light of my laptop screen reflecting in the dark window. I had a half-empty glass of water and a case file that was giving me a migraine. When my phone buzzed against the granite countertop, the sound was aggressive. I looked at the screen. It said, unknown caller. Usually. I did not answer unknown numbers. In my line of work, anonymity was either a telemarketer or a threat, and I had no patience for the former and plenty of protocols for the latter. I reached out to silence it, intending to let it go to voicemail. If it was important, they would leave a message. If it was my family trying to ambush me from a burner phone, I would be spared the drama. But then the phone buzzed again, and a second later, a secure notification popped up on my laptop screen, a ping from a routed server that I had not given to anyone outside the agency. Someone was not just calling me. Someone was bridging a secure line to find me. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. This was not a social call. This was a breach. Or it was an authorization. I picked up the phone and swiped the green icon. I did not say hello. I did not say my name. I simply held the phone to my ear and waited, listening to the silence on the other end. It was a professional habit. Never give your voice away first. Harper Brooks, a woman's voice said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the crisp, icy precision of someone who was accustomed to being obeyed. The voice was familiar, but not in a way that made sense. I had heard it on television. I had heard it in campaign ads. I had heard it over the rim of a wine glass at the engagement party I had been disinvited from. Who is this? I asked, keeping my voice flat. This is Marin Kincaid. I sat up straighter, my spine locking into place. The senator's wife, the woman who was about to become my sister's mother-in-law, the woman who had watched my father humiliate me at dinner and had said nothing. My first instinct was that this was another front in the family pressure campaign. I thought perhaps she was calling to lecture me on etiquette, or to explain why my absence was necessary for the polling numbers. If you are calling about the wedding, I began, my hand hovering over the end call button. I have already received the message loud and clear. I am not coming. We are not calling about the wedding, Marin said. Her voice cut through my defense like a diamond cutter. We were told you are the best person to handle this. I froze. We were told. The phrasing was specific. It was passive, careful, and terrifying. It implied that she had spoken to people who knew who I actually was. Who told you that? I asked. A mutual acquaintance at the Treasury Department, she said. A woman named Daria Knox. She said you are the only forensic analyst in the Midwest who can look at a bleeding balance sheet and tell the difference between a knife wound and a hemorrhage. My blood went cold. Daria would never burn me. She would never give up my identity to a civilian, let alone a high-profile political family. Unless the situation was catastrophic. If Daria had given Marin Kincaid my number, the building was not just on fire. It had already collapsed. I closed my laptop. I walked to the window. Looking down at the empty street, Mrs. Kincaid, I said, shifting instantly from the rejected daughter to the senior analyst. You are calling on a personal line. This is highly irregular. We do not have time for regular, she said. The crispness in her voice cracked, just for a millisecond, revealing a jagged edge of panic underneath. We have a situation, a financial situation. Go on. Are you alone? She asked. Yes, the Kincaid Family Foundation, she said, measuring every word as if she were paying for them by the ounce. It is our primary charitable arm. It handles everything from veteran support to literacy programs. 3 hours ago, our internal auditor flagged a series of transfers that do not make sense. Define do not make sense, I said. Large sums, she said. 7 figures. Moving out of the endowment and into vendor accounts that we do not recognize. The transfers were authorized by a digital signature that belongs to a board member. But the timestamps are from hours when that person was physically with us at a fundraiser. I rubbed my temple. This was classic embezzlement. It was the kind of thing I saw 3 times a week. Call the FBI. I said, you have a cybercrime division contact. Use them. We cannot. She said, the words came out in a rush. Why not? Because the transfers are dated over the last 6 months, she said, and the wedding is in 5 days. And on Monday morning, the senator is announcing a major policy initiative on financial transparency and anti-corruption. I let out a low breath. The timing was not just bad. It was lethal. If the press found out that the senator's own charity was hemorrhaging money into shell accounts just as he was launching an anti-corruption platform, his career would be over before lunch. And if the FBI got involved, it would be a matter of public record within 24 hours. You want it contained, I said. You want a fixer. You want someone to bury the bodies and scrub the hard drives so you can have your wedding and your policy launch without a headline? No, Marin said. Her voice hardened. We have plenty of fixers. Harper, I have a contact list full of men who can shred documents. I do not need a shredder. I need to know who is doing this. Why come to me? I asked. You know who my family is. You know what my father thinks of me. That is exactly why. She said, because you are the one person in this entire orbit who has absolutely no reason to lie to protect us. I stayed silent. It was a shrewd calculation. She knew I had been cast out. She knew I owed them nothing. In her mind, that made me the most objective observer available. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about the irony. My father had called me worthless because I did not fit into their picture of success. Now, the very people he was desperate to impress were calling me in the middle of the night because I was the only one competent enough to save them. I cannot discuss my work, I said, giving the standard line. I am a federal employee. I cannot take private commissions. This is not a commission, she said. This is a request for a consultation on a potential federal crime involving a United States senator. Daria said you could be assigned to it. She said she could authorize it as a preliminary inquiry if we invited you in. Daria was 2 steps ahead, as always. She had framed this so I could do it legally. I need access. I said, I need everything. Bank records, server logs, email archives for every board member. I need the auditor's initial report, and I need it tonight. You will have it. Marin said, I am sending a courier with a secure drive now. He will be at your apartment in 20 minutes. I walked back to the kitchen island. I picked up a pen and clicked it. The sound sharp in the quiet apartment. One condition. Mrs. Kincaid. Name it. I do not do cosmetic surgery on reputations. I said, my voice was low and steady, if I look at these books, I am going to find the truth. And if the truth is ugly, if it implicates someone you love, or someone you need, or even the senator himself, I am not going to bury it. I report the facts. I do not spin them. If you want a story, call a publicist. If you want the truth, keep me on the line. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing. It was the sound of a woman standing on a ledge, deciding whether or not to jump. She was weighing the risk of a scandal against the risk of the unknown. She was terrified, but she was also smart enough to know that ignorance was more dangerous than exposure. She exhaled. It was a long, shuddering sound, like she had been holding her breath for 3 weeks. We do not want a story, she said quietly. We want to know who is betraying us. Then we have a deal, I said. I was about to hang up, to start brewing a pot of coffee that would need to last me until dawn. When she spoke again, her voice was different this time. The command was gone, replaced by a strange, quiet respect. Harper, she said. Yes, the senator is here with me. He is listening. I paused. I had assumed she was making this call from a bathroom or a private study. Hiding the crisis from her husband, he asked me to tell you something. She continued. He said that he does not care about your father's opinion. He trusts Daria Knox, and he asked to meet you. When? I asked. As soon as you confirm what you are seeing, she said. Tonight, tomorrow morning. Whenever you have a name. He wants to hear it from you directly, not through a lawyer, not through me. From you. I looked at the reflection of my face in the dark window. The worthless daughter. The embarrassment. The unstable girl who needed to be kept away from the wedding. Tell the senator to have his coffee ready. I said, I will be done by sunrise. I ended the call. For a moment, I just stood there, holding the phone. The apartment was silent, but the air felt charged, electric with the sudden shift in gravity. My father had spent his entire life trying to get Senator Kincaid's attention. He had bought the right suits, donated to the right campaigns, and sold his own daughter down the river just to secure an invite to the man's table. And now, the senator was waiting for me. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel happy. I felt the cold, sharp clarity of the hunt. I walked to the door and unlocked the deadbolt, waiting for the courier. I went to the kitchen and started the coffee machine. I pulled my hair back into a tight ponytail and rolled up the sleeves of my sweatshirt. The version of me they invented, the sad, small, jealous girl, was currently sleeping in a bed somewhere in their imagination. The real Harper Brooks was awake, and she was about to take the Kincaid family apart, transaction by transaction, to save them from themselves. The courier arrived at 12:22 in the morning. He was a young man on a bicycle, shivering in the Chicago wind, who handed me a sealed envelope with a biometric lock and left without a word. Inside the envelope was a solid-state drive, heavy and cold, looking more like a weapon than a storage device. I plugged it into my laptop, entered the 64-character encryption key Marin had texted me, and watched my screen fill with the inner workings of the Kincaid Family Foundation. I did not start by looking for the money. That is the mistake amateurs make. If you look for the money, you get distracted by the zeros. Instead, I looked for the silence. I looked for the gaps in the data where information should have been but was not. I looked for invoices that were approved too quickly, for timestamps that landed on weekends, and for vendor names that sounded just generic enough to be invisible for the next 4 hours. The only sound in my apartment was the clicking of my keyboard and the hum of the hard drive. I went into full investigator mode. My brain shifted gears, disengaging from the emotional wreckage of my personal life and locking into the cold, binary rhythm of forensic analysis. I built a visual map of the Foundation's cash flow on my second monitor. It was a complex web of grants, operational costs, and donor inflows. At first glance, everything looked pristine. The audits were clean. The quarterly reports were balanced. But as I drilled down into the raw metadata of the accounts payable ledger, I began to see the fingerprints. They were faint, but they were there. The pattern was what we call structuring. It is a technique used to bypass automated compliance flags. Instead of moving one massive lump sum, the perpetrator moves smaller amounts: $48,000, $32,000, $19,000, amounts that sit just below the threshold of immediate scrutiny. I isolated these transactions. There were 17 of them in the last 4 months. I pulled up the vendor list. The money was flowing to 3 distinct companies: Orion Logistics, Blue Water Consulting, and K Strategy Group. I ran a background check on the corporate registrations. This is where the respectable theft usually falls apart. Smart criminals use layers of offshore shell companies to hide the ownership. But these companies were not registered in the Cayman Islands or Switzerland. They were registered in Delaware and Illinois, using registered agents that were cheap and sloppy. I pulled the incorporation documents. The addresses were virtual offices, mail drops, and strip malls. The websites were templates filled with stock photos of people shaking hands and looking at blueprints. This was not a political crime. This was not a foreign state actor trying to compromise a senator. This was not a sophisticated hacking syndicate. The lack of sophistication whispered something much uglier. It whispered family convenience. It suggested that the person stealing the money did not think they needed to hide it very well because they felt entitled to it. They were not afraid of getting caught because they believed they were protected by the shield of the Kincaid name. I cross-referenced the approval timestamps with the senator's public schedule. On October 4th, a transfer of $55,000 was authorized to Blue Water Consulting. On that day, the Foundation's CFO was in London. The senator was in D.C., voting on a bill, but the digital signature used to authorize the transfer originated from an IP address in Naperville, Illinois. I froze. Naperville. I felt a sick lurch in my stomach. I typed in the coordinates of the IP address. It resolved to a high-end country club, the same country club where my father played golf, the same country club where Ethan Kincaid had held his bachelor party weekend. I dug deeper. I needed to know who held the keys to the authorization. The digital signature belonged to a board member named Julian Vance. I knew the name. Everyone knew the name. Julian Vance was Ethan Kincaid's college roommate, his business partner, and the man Ethan had insisted was like a brother to him. Julian was the treasurer of the foundation. He was the golden boy's golden boy, always smiling in the background of the photos, always pouring the champagne. I pulled up the invoices for Blue Water Consulting. They were billing for strategic introductions and donor retention services. It was vague corporate speak for nothing. But Julian Vance was already rich. Why was he skimming a few $100,000 from his best friend's father? It did not make sense. The risk outweighed the reward. Unless he wasn't keeping the money, I followed the money out of the Blue Water Consulting account. I hacked into the bank records, strictly speaking. This was a gray area legally, but Marin had given me access to the foundation, and I was following the trail where it led. The money entered Blue Water's account and sat there for less than 24 hours before being wired out again. It was being split. 70% went to an account in the Bahamas that I could not immediately crack, but 30% a consistent, recurring 30% referral fee went to a domestic LLC called HB Associates. I typed HB Associates into the Illinois Business Registry. My fingers hovered over the enter key. I had a feeling I knew what I was going to see, but my brain refused to process it. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted this to be a coincidence. I wanted HB to stand for anything else. I hit enter. HB Associates. Principal Agent Robert Brooks, my father. I sat back in my chair. The breath knocked out of me. The room spun slightly. My father was not the mastermind. He was not smart enough to set up the shell companies or manage the digital signatures. But he was on the payroll. I pulled up the emails linked to the invoices. I found a thread between Julian Vance and my father. The subject line was Consulting Retainer. October. I opened the attachment. It was an email from my father to Julian. Julian, great to see you on the course. I have lined up the meeting with the developers for next week. They are very eager to get in front of the senator. As discussed. Attached is the invoice for the introduction fee. I appreciate you handling this discreetly. We are all going to do great things together once the families are officially united. I read it again. My father was selling access to the senator. He was using his proximity to the wedding, his status as the father of the bride, to promise favors and meetings to local businessmen. And Julian Vance was facilitating it, paying my father off with stolen foundation money to keep him happy, while Julian presumably pocketed the larger share from the developers themselves. It was so small. It was so petty. It was grift. My father had called me worthless because I did not enhance his image. Meanwhile, he was actively trading on the Kincaid name like it was a currency he had printed in his basement. He was bragging about the Kincaids to strangers, acting the big shot, while secretly attaching himself to anything profitable nearby like a barnacle. He was not just embarrassing, he was a liability. And Julian Vance. Julian was playing my father like a fiddle. He was using my father's greed to launder his own theft. If the scheme blew up, Julian could point to the invoices and say, "Look, the senator's future father-in-law was the one demanding payments." My father was the fall guy, and he was too arrogant to see it. I looked at the clock. It was 5:15 in the morning. The sun was just starting to bruise the horizon with purple light. I picked up my phone and dialed Marin Kincaid. She answered on the first ring. "Tell me," she said. I took a breath. The words tasted like ash. "I have found the leak." I said, "It is a structural bypass in your vendor approval system. The money is being funneled through 3 shell companies." "Who?" she asked. "The primary authorization comes from Julian Vance." I said. There was a silence on the line. A long, heavy silence. "Julian," she whispered. "Ethan's best man." "Yes, he is using the foundation to pay out kickbacks for development deals and access fees. He is draining the endowment to pay for influence peddling." I waited. I knew I had to drop the second bomb. "Marin," I said, "there is something else. What is it?" "Julian is not working alone. He has a beneficiary, a consultant who is receiving a 30% cut of the outgoing funds for arranging these meetings." "Who is the consultant?" "Harper." I closed my eyes. I pictured my father at the dinner table. I pictured his face when he called me worthless. I pictured the pride he took in his suit, his car, his image. It is a company called HB Associates. I said, "The principal is Robert Brooks." The silence this time was different. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of confirmation. Marin let out a sound that was half sigh, half groan. I knew it. She said softly, "You knew. We suspected." She said, "The senator. He has had people approach him recently, people mentioning your father's name, saying that Robert promised them a sit-down, saying that Robert told them he could fast-track their permits. There has been noise around him for months. Harper, we tried to ignore it. We thought it was just him being overzealous. We did not know he was taking money for it. I said, he is invoicing for it. He thinks he is a power broker. He does not realize Julian is setting him up to take the blame if the auditors look too closely." Marin was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice regaining that steel I had heard earlier. "This kills the policy launch," she said. "If it comes out that the senator's family is selling access, he is finished. And if we cover it up, and it comes out later, he is in prison. The truth is the only way out." I said, "You cannot bury this. The paper trail is too wide. You have to cauterize the wound." "What are you saying?" she asked. "I am saying you have to cut them off." I said, "Both of them. You have to expose Julian before the wedding, and you have to stop my father." "But the wedding?" she started. "The wedding is a stage set," I said, cutting her off. "And underneath the stage, there is a fire. You can either let the fire burn the whole theater down, or you can dismantle the set to put it out." I waited. I knew what I was asking. I was asking her to destroy her son's best friendship and her future in-law's reputation days before the ceremony. But I also knew she was a survivor. "Harper," Marin said. Her voice was low. "Yes. Can you prove all of this? Can you show us the chain of custody, the emails, the signatures? I have everything." I said, "I have the bank routing numbers. I have the invoices signed by my father. I have the metadata linking Julian to the transfers. It is airtight." She paused. I heard the rustle of fabric, like she was turning to look at someone. "The senator is awake," she said. "He has been pacing the floor since you called. Tell him the bad news." I said, "No," Marin said. "I am not going to tell him." "Why not?" "Because he needs to look you in the eye when he sees what your father has done," she said. "He needs to see that you are the one bringing this to him. He needs to understand exactly who you are." "Harper." She took a breath. "Can you be here in 2 hours?" she asked. "Where is here?" "The estate on the lake," she said. "We are staying there for the week leading up to the wedding. It is a 40-minute drive from the city." I looked at the screen, at the damning evidence against the man who had raised me. I felt a strange sense of calm. I was not protecting him anymore. I was not protecting any of them. "I will be there," I said. "Bring the drive," Marin said. "And Harper, yes, dress for a reckoning," she said. The line went dead. I put the phone down. I stared at the email on my screen, at my father's signature flamboyant, looping, confident. He had signed his name to his own destruction, thinking it was a check. I stood up and walked to my closet. I pushed aside the soft sweaters and the casual jeans. I reached for the garment bag at the back. I pulled out a black dress. It was structured, severe, and expensive. It was the kind of dress you wore when you were going to a funeral, or a board meeting, or an execution. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I did not look tired. I looked sharp. I looked dangerous. My father had told everyone I was worthless. He had told everyone I was unstable. He had told everyone I was jealous. In 2 hours, I was going to walk into a room with a United States senator and show him that the only person in the Brooks family with any integrity was the one they had uninvited. I packed the laptop. I packed the drive. I grabbed my keys. The sun was up now. The city was waking up, and I was driving to Wisconsin to burn my father's house of cards to the ground. The drive to Lake Geneva took exactly 55 minutes from the city limits. I drove in silence, the radio off, my mind organizing the data I had extracted like a deck of cards that I was about to lay down on a table. The Wisconsin landscape rolled by in a blur of green fields and high fences, the kind that marked the boundaries of estates where privacy was the most expensive commodity on the deed. I arrived at the gate of the Kincaid estate at 9 in the morning. It was a sprawling property that smelled of old money and pine needles. The driveway was crushed gravel, a deliberate choice that announced the arrival of any vehicle with a polite, rhythmic crunching sound. I parked my sedan between a Range Rover and a vintage Jaguar. Stepping out into the crisp, lakeside air, I had chosen my outfit with the precision of a tactician. I was not wearing the frumpy, ill-fitting clothes my mother always criticized. I was not wearing the bridesmaid dress I had been denied. I was wearing a black silk blouse and wide-leg trousers from a French label that did not put logos on their products because their customers did not need to advertise. My hair was pulled back in a low, severe bun. I wore no jewelry except for a simple watch. I looked like what I was, a consultant who billed by the hour at a rate that made grown men nervous. I walked up the stone steps to the main entrance. I expected a doorbell or a wait. Instead, the heavy double doors opened before I even reached the threshold. A man in a dark suit, clearly the house manager, stepped out. He did not ask who I was. He did not ask for ID. "Ms. Brooks," he said, inclining his head with a deference that was startling. "The senator is expecting you. Please, come this way." He did not treat me like the sister of the bride. He did not treat me like a family member who had arrived late. He treated me like a visiting dignitary, someone whose presence had the potential to change the temperature of the room. I followed him through a foyer that was larger than my entire apartment. The house was silent in the way that only very large houses are, the silence absorbing the sound of our footsteps on the marble. We passed a formal living room where the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. Marin Kincaid was waiting for me in the hallway leading to the back of the house. She looked different than she had in the photos, in the magazines. She was always smiling, always polished to a shine. Here, in the morning light filtering through the high windows, she looked exhausted. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and I noticed the tension in her knuckles. She was wearing a cream cardigan and slacks, looking every inch the political matriarch. But her eyes were shadowed. She watched me approach. Her gaze swept over me, taking in the clothes, the posture, the laptop bag slung over my shoulder. "Harper," she said. "Mrs. Kincaid," I replied. She let out a small, tight breath. "You came." "I told you I would." She nodded, looking past me toward the front door, as if checking to make sure I was alone. Then she looked back at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. I saw a woman who was terrified of what was coming but grateful that someone had finally arrived who could actually handle it. "You look different," she said softly. "I look like myself," I said. She managed a faint, sad smile. "You were right to keep your life quiet. In this world, invisibility is the only shield that actually works. We spend our lives under lights, and it burns everything away eventually." She gestured toward the double glass doors at the end of the hall. "The senator is on the terrace," she said. "We are having a gathering." "A brunch?" I paused. "You said this was a private briefing." "It is private," she said, her voice regaining its steel. "But the senator wanted to do this in a specific context. He believes that context is important." I did not like the sound of that. I gripped the strap of my bag tighter. "Is there anyone else here?" "Marin." She did not answer. She simply turned and pushed open the glass doors. I stepped out onto the terrace. The view was breathtaking. The lawn rolled down to the edge of the lake, which was sparkling under the morning sun. There were stone planters filled with white hydrangeas and a long teak table set for breakfast with linen napkins and crystal glasses. And sitting at that table was my entire family. I stopped dead in my tracks. For a second, the scene looked like a painting of the perfect American family. My father was at the center, wearing a beige linen suit that he must have bought specifically for this weekend. He was holding a coffee cup, leaning back with a laugh frozen on his face, performing the role of the relaxed, affluent patriarch. My mother was next to him in a floral dress, nodding eagerly at something Senator Kincaid was saying. Brooke was there, looking radiant and anxious, her hand resting on Ethan's arm. Ethan was smiling, that easy, unburdened smile of a man who thinks the world is his playground. They were all there. They were all auditioning. They were trying so hard to belong to this setting, to this family, to this level of power. And then they saw me. The reaction rippled down the table like a shockwave. My mother was the first to see me. Her glass was halfway to her mouth. She froze. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like a physical effect. She lowered the glass, her hand trembling, and the liquid sloshed over the rim onto the white tablecloth. Brooke turned to follow her gaze. Her eyes went wide. She looked like she had seen a ghost she had tried to bury politely. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from me to Marin, and then back to me, trying to process why the sister she had banished was standing on the terrace of her future in-law's estate. But it was my father's reaction that was the most telling. He stood up. He did not stand up to greet me. He stood up too fast, his chair scraping violently against the stone patio. A harsh, grating sound that killed the conversation instantly. He looked panicked. He looked like a man who had been caught trespassing. He stared at me, his eyes darting to my clothes, my bag, the way I was standing next to Marin Kincaid. "Harper," he stammered. His voice was too loud for the open air. "What? What are you doing here?" He looked at the senator, a desperate, sweating smile plastering itself onto his face. "Senator, I am so sorry. I had no idea she was coming. She sometimes gets confused about invitations. I will handle this." He started to move around the table, coming toward me with his hands raised, as if he were going to herd a stray animal back into a cage. "Please, excuse my daughter," he said to the table, laughing nervously. "She is going through a difficult time." "Harper, you need to leave. This is a private event." I did not move. I did not step back. I watched him come toward me. This man who had called me worthless. This man who was currently selling access to the very person he was trying to apologize to. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No fear, no shame. Just a cold, clinical observation of a man digging his own grave. "Robert," a voice said. It was not a shout. It was a low, resonant baritone that carried absolute authority. Senator Miles Kincaid had not stood up. He was sitting at the head of the table, reading a newspaper. He folded the paper slowly, placing it next to his plate. He took off his reading glasses. He did not look at my father. He looked past him, directly at me. "Sit down." "Robert," the senator said. My father froze. He looked at the senator, then at me, confusion warring with fear in his eyes. "But, Senator, she is intruding. I told you about her condition. I will just escort her to her car." "I said sit down," the senator repeated. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. The command was absolute. My father stopped. He looked around the table, seeing Marin's icy expression, seeing Ethan's sudden stillness. He slowly, uncertainly, sank back into his chair. He looked small. Senator Kincaid stood up then. He was a tall man, imposing, with the kind of presence that made you understand why he won elections. He walked around the table, ignoring my mother, ignoring Brooke, ignoring Ethan. He walked straight to me. He stopped 2 feet away. He looked me in the eye, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen by someone in this circle. He did not see a poor relation. He did not see a charity case. He saw a peer. "You are Harper Brooks," he said. It was not a question. It was a recognition. "Yes, Senator," I said. He extended his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, dry, and respectful. "I want to thank you for coming," he said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "Marin told me you drove up from the city on short notice. I appreciate you making the time." My father made a choking sound. "Senator, you know Harper." The senator turned his head slightly, giving my father a look that could have frozen the lake. "I know who she is now." "Robert," the senator said, "and frankly, I am wondering why I had to find out from my own security clearance instead of from her family. He turned back to me. Marin tells me you are the best at what you do, he said. She tells me you are the reason we might be able to salvage a very difficult situation. I kept my face neutral. I am just here to provide the facts. Senator, facts are rare these days, he said. He gestured to the empty chair at his right hand, the seat of honor. Please, join us. We have a lot to discuss. I walked past my father. I could smell his cologne, acrid with sweat. He was staring at me with his mouth slightly open, his face a mask of total incomprehension. He could not process what was happening. In his world, I was the failure. In his world, I was the one who embarrassed him. He could not compute a reality where the senator was ushering me to the head of the table while he sat on the sidelines. I sat down. A server appeared instantly, placing a fresh cup of coffee in front of me and pouring it without me asking. I looked across the table. Brooke was staring at me. Her hands were shaking in her lap. She looked at my suit, at my hair, at the way the senator was leaning in to speak to me. For the first time, she did not look at me with pity or disdain. She looked at me with fear. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she did not know me at all. My mother was gripping her napkin. Harper, she whispered, what is going on? The senator answered for me. Harper is here to help us with a security matter, he said smoothly. It seems there has been a breach in the foundation, a serious one, and your daughter is the only person with the integrity to help us find the leak. He emphasized the word integrity. He let it hang in the air like a weapon. My father tried to speak again. His ego could not let the moment pass without trying to reclaim the room. Well, of course, he said, his voice shrill. Harper has always been detail-oriented. We always said that about her. Good with puzzles. I turned to look at him. I did not smile. This is not a puzzle. Dad, I said, it is a forensic audit of a federal crime. The words hit him like a physical slap. He blinked. Federal crime. Yes, I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the hard drive. I placed it on the table. The black plastic looked stark against the white linen. The senator looked at the drive, then at me. Is it all there? He asked. Every penny. I said. The shell companies, the fake invoices, the names of the people who authorized them, and the names of the people who received the kickbacks. I felt the tension in the room spike. Ethan Kincaid went very still. He looked at the drive, and I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew, or at least, he suspected. My father looked at the drive, and for the first time, a dawn of true horror broke over his face. He recognized the threat. He realized that the conversation was not about my social standing anymore. It was about his survival. He looked at me, pleadingly. Harper, he said. I did not look back. I turned to the senator. Shall we review the findings now? Senator, or would you prefer to finish your breakfast? The senator pushed his plate away. Breakfast is over, he said. He looked around the table. I think it is time for the rest of you to leave us, he said. Harper and I have work to do. My father stood up, his legs shaking. But, Senator, surely this concerns the family. We should stay. We can help. The senator looked at him with a gaze that was completely devoid of warmth. It does concern the family. Robert, he said, that is exactly why you need to leave. He turned his back on them. He turned to me. Go ahead. Harper, he said, I am listening. I opened my laptop. Behind me, I heard the sound of chairs scraping, of hesitant footsteps, of a family being dismissed from the room where the real power lived. I did not watch them go. I did not need to. I had already taken the room. Now, I was going to take the rest. The senator had stepped inside to take a call from his chief of staff, leaving me alone on the terrace with the remnants of the brunch and the family I had just dismantled. The air was still, heavy with the humidity rising off the lake. But the silence was heavier. It was the kind of silence that happens after a car crash, before the sirens start. I began to pack up my laptop. I did not rush. I slid the hard drive into its protective case. I wound the charging cable into a perfect circle. I could feel their eyes on my back. They had not left the estate as they were told. They had retreated to the edge of the patio, hovering near the French doors like actors who had missed their cue to exit the stage and were now unsure where to stand. I zipped my bag and turned around. Brooke was there. She had separated herself from the others and moved toward me. She was not crying. Her face was dry, set in a rigid mask of confusion and defensiveness. She wore a dress of pale yellow silk that fluttered in the breeze, but her posture was stiff. She cornered me against the stone railing, her body blocking my path to the door. She smiled. It was a terrifying expression. It was too sharp to be friendly, too tight to be genuine. It was the smile of a woman who was watching her wedding cake slide off the table and was trying to convince everyone it was part of the show. "You have been busy, Harper," she said. Her voice was light, breathless, but there was a tremor in it. I looked at her. I did not smile back. "I have been working, Brooke, working," she repeated. She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Is that what we are calling it? You show up here, at my fiancé's family estate, wearing a suit that costs more than my wedding dress, acting like you own the place. You sit at the head of the table. You talk to the senator like he is your colleague." I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. "He is my colleague. For today, at least." Brooke took a step closer. The perfume she wore, a floral scent I recognized from her high school days, was overpowering. "Why did you not tell me?" she hissed, the mask slipping just an inch. "Why did you let us treat you like that? Why did you let Dad give that speech at dinner? Why did you sit there and let us think you were a nobody?" I looked at her, at the panic swimming in her blue eyes. She was not angry that I had been insulted. She was angry that she had bet on the wrong horse. She was angry that she had spent years looking down on me, only to realize I was standing on a floor above her the entire time. I answered her simply. "You never wanted to know. That is not true," she snapped. "We are sisters." I shook my head slowly. "No, Brooke, you wanted a foil. You wanted someone to be the mess so you could be the masterpiece. If I had told you I was a senior forensic analyst for the federal government, if I had told you I hunted corruption for a living, it would have ruined the narrative. You did not want a sister who was your equal. You wanted a sister who was your project." Brooke flinched. She looked down at her engagement ring, twisting the diamond so hard I thought she might cut her finger. "I had to protect this," she whispered, gesturing vaguely at the house, the lake, the life she was marrying into. "You do not understand the pressure. Harper, the Kincaids, they are different. They expect perfection. They vet everyone." I waited. I knew the confession was coming. I could see it rising in her throat. "When Dad told them you were not coming," she said, her voice dropping so low I had to lean in to hear her. I had to explain why. I had to give them a reason that made sense but did not make us look like a cruel family. "And what reason was that?" I asked, though I already knew. She looked up at me, her eyes wet now, pleading for an absolution I was not going to give. "I told them you were unstable," she said. The words hung in the air between us. "I told them you had episodes," she continued, the words spilling out faster now. "I told them you were jealous of my success and that you could be unpredictable in large crowds. I told them it was a kindness to keep you away. I had to manage perceptions. Harper, I had to make sure they did not think we were just mean. I had to make them think we were victims of your illness." I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It hit like ice water, shocking and clarifying. I had suspected it, of course, but hearing her say it was different. She had not just abandoned me. She had not just stood by while our father bullied me. She had actively sold a false version of me to buy her future. She had traded my reputation for her social security. She had painted me as crazy so she could look sane. "You sold me," I said quietly. Brooke wiped her eye carefully, so as not to smudge her mascara. "I did what I had to do. This is the happiest time of my life. Harper, I just wanted it to go smoothly." I looked at her, and I realized that I did not hate her. Hate requires energy. Hate implies that the person matters. I just felt a profound, hollow distance. She was a stranger to me. You built your happiness on a lie. Brooke, I said, and you are about to find out that lies have a very short shelf life in this house. Before she could answer, a shadow fell over us. Ethan Kincaid stepped onto the terrace. He looked every inch the golden boy, blonde hair perfectly coiffed, teeth white enough to blind, a casual polo shirt that probably cost $400. He walked with the easy confidence of a man who has never had to apologize for anything because his checkbook always did it for him. He moved to Brooke's side, placing a protective hand on her lower back, but his eyes were locked on me. He was smiling, but the smile did not reach his eyes. His eyes were alert, scanning my face, scanning the bag on my shoulder. "Harper," he said, his voice smooth like bourbon. "I am so glad we finally have a moment to chat." "Ethan," I said. He stepped closer, invading my personal space just enough to be intimate, offering charm like a bribe. "I know things have been complicated with your dad," he said, flashing a sympathetic look that was rehearsed to perfection. "But I want you to know, Brooke and I, we value family above everything. Whatever miscommunications happened, we want to fix them. We want you to be part of this weekend." He paused, watching to see if I would soften. He was waiting for the gratitude. He was waiting for the lonely, rejected sister to melt under the attention of the senator's son. But I saw what was under the charm. I saw the tiny bead of sweat at his temple. I saw the way his fingers twitched against Brooke's dress. He was not afraid of me personally. He did not care about my feelings. He was afraid of what was in my bag. He knew Julian Vance. He knew the finances. He might not have known about my father's involvement, but he knew about the money. He knew about the shell companies. And he was terrified that I had connected the dots. "You want me to be part of the weekend?" I repeated flatly. "Absolutely," Ethan said, beaming. "In fact, I was hoping we could sit down later, just the three of us, have a drink, talk about the future. I would love to hear more about your work. It sounds fascinating." He was fishing. He wanted to know how much I knew. He wanted to know if the blast radius included him. I looked at him, and I decided not to give him the mercy of a warning. "My work is confidential." "Ethan," I said, "and as for the future, I think we should get through today before we make any plans." His smile faltered. Just for a second. The mask slipped, and I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated fear. "Right," he said, his laugh sounding brittle. "Of course, one step at a time." He steered Brooke away, whispering something in her ear, glancing back at me over his shoulder like I was a bomb that had been left unattended. I watched them go, and then I turned to see my father. He had been waiting for them to leave. He stood near the French doors, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He looked smaller than he had at dinner. The bluster was gone. The booming voice was gone. He looked like a man who had bet the house on a hand of cards and just realized he was holding nothing. He walked toward me. He did not look me in the eye. He looked at my shoulder, at the lake, at his shoes. "Harper," he said. I waited. I wanted to say. He started, clearing his throat. "I might have been a little harsh at dinner. You know how I get. The stress, the planning." He looked up then, attempting a smile that was meant to be paternal. "You have always been sensitive, honey," he said. "You take things to heart so deeply. I just wanted to make sure you were not overwhelmed by the event. I was trying to protect you." I stared at him. I could not believe the audacity. Even now, standing on the edge of a precipice, he was trying to gaslight me. He was trying to frame his cruelty as protection and my reaction as sensitivity. I shut it down. "Stop," I said. He blinked. "Excuse me. Stop talking." "Dad," I said. I stepped toward him. He actually took a step back, intimidated by the coldness in my voice. "I am not sensitive," I said, "and you were not protecting me. You called me worthless because you thought it was safe." He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. "You looked at my life, my quiet apartment, my old car, my lack of bragging, And you decided I had no value. I continued. You decided I was safe to abuse because you thought I had no power. You thought I was weak. You thought I would just take it, like I always have. I lowered my voice, making sure he heard every syllable. But you miscalculated. You confused privacy with poverty. You confused silence with submission. And now, you are standing here, realizing that the daughter you called worthless is the only reason you are not currently in handcuffs. His face turned a sickly shade of gray. He understood. Finally, he understood. He looked at the bag on my shoulder, realizing that his fate was zipped inside it. I did not know. He whispered. The excuse was pathetic. It was the last refuge of a small man. That is the point. I said. You never asked. I walked past him. As I reached the French doors, I saw Marin Kincaid standing in the shadow of the hallway. She had been there the whole time. She had watched Brooke try to manipulate me. She had watched Ethan try to bribe me. She had watched my father try to lie to me. She looked tired. Her face was pale, and her arms were crossed tight across her chest. She looked like a woman who was realizing that the wedding was not the only thing being staged. She was realizing that she was about to merge her family with a group of people who were morally bankrupt. She met my eyes. She did not say anything. She just nodded, a single, sharp dip of her chin. It was an acknowledgement. I see them now. The look said, I see exactly what they are. Behind her, the library door opened. Senator Miles Kincaid stepped out. He had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. He held a file folder in his hand. He did not look at my family, who were huddled together on the terrace like survivors of a shipwreck. He looked at me. Harper, he said quietly. Yes, Senator. We need to speak again, he said. I thought we covered the foundation accounts. I said, we covered the money, he said. His voice was grim. But I have been looking at the timeline you provided, and I have been looking at the guest list. He glanced toward the terrace, where Ethan was now arguing in hushed tones with Brooke. There is an intersection in the data, the senator said. A connection I missed the first time. I suspect the problem is not over. I felt a fresh wave of adrenaline. Where do you want to meet? I asked. My study, he said. Away from everyone. There is a name in your files that matches a name on a contract Ethan signed 3 months ago. He held the door open for me. Come with me, he said. We need to see how deep the rot goes. I walked through the door, leaving my family outside in the cold, and followed the senator into the dark heart of the house. The study was a cavern of mahogany and leather, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and old paper. It was a room designed for silence, the kind of silence where decisions are made that change stock prices and ruin careers. The heavy door clicked shut behind us, sealing out the sunlight, the lake, and the family that was currently disintegrating on the terrace. Senator Miles Kincaid sat behind his desk. He did not look like a politician now. He looked like a judge. I placed the laptop on the leather blotter and turned the screen toward him. I did not offer a preamble. I did not try to soften the blow. In my line of work, I had learned that when you are delivering a diagnosis of cancer, you do not talk about the weather first. I pulled up the timeline I had constructed in the car. It was a visual map of the foundation's hemorrhage, overlaid with a secondary timeline of a private equity deal known as Project Janus. The timeline is the only thing that never lies, I said, my voice low and steady in the quiet room. The senator leaned forward, putting on his reading glasses. He traced the lines on the screen with a finger that did not tremble. Walk me through it, he said. I pointed to the dates in late November. Here, I said, this is when the foundation transferred $2 million to Blue Water Consulting. We already established that Blue Water is a shell company. We established that Julian Vance authorized the transfer, and we established that my father, Robert Brooks, received a kickback for facilitating the paperwork. The senator nodded. I know this. Julian is a thief, and your father is a fool. I tapped a key, bringing up a new layer of data. That is the surface crime. I said, that is the sloppy part. But thieves usually steal to buy things. Cars, houses, lifestyle. Julian Vance is already wealthy. He does not need $2 million to buy a boat. So I looked at where the money went after it left the shell company. I pointed to the final destination of the funds, a holding account for a failing commercial real estate venture in downtown Chicago. A venture that was bleeding cash and facing a regulatory audit for insolvency. The money did not go to Julian. I said, it went to plug a hole in a balance sheet for a company called Kincaid Vance Partners. The senator went very still. That is Ethan's firm. He said, yes, I said. The senator closed his eyes for a brief second. It was a micro-expression of pain, quickly suppressed. Ethan told me that project was solvent. He said quietly, he told me they had secured private financing to cover the construction delays. They did secure financing. I said, they secured it from your charity. I brought up the final document. It was a memorandum of understanding, a document that technically sat on the legal side of the gray area, but morally, it was poison. It was signed 3 months ago. The signature at the bottom was not Julian's, it was Ethan's. The twist was not that Ethan was stealing, it was that the entire wedding, the entire merging of our families, was a distraction. Ethan made a deal, I said, keeping my voice clinical. He leveraged the foundation's assets to save his business reputation, but he knew that if the audit happened before the quarter closed, he would be exposed. He needed a shield. He needed a narrative that was so wholesome, so distracting, that no one would look at the books for 6 months. I looked at the senator. He needed a wedding. I said, he needed a perfect, suburban, non-political bride. He needed a love story to fill the newspapers so that the financial pages would look the other way. The senator stared at the signature of his only son. He looked at the date. He is not just marrying Brooke because he loves her, the senator whispered. He is marrying her because she is a diversion. It was a gut punch. My sister, who believed she had been chosen for her grace and her beauty, was actually chosen because she was the perfect smokescreen. She was the magician's assistant, waving a handkerchief on stage while the magician picked the audience's pockets. The senator sat back in his chair. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. He was not shocked by the corruption. He had spent 30 years in Washington. He knew how money moved. He was shocked by the proximity. He was shocked that the rot was sitting at his own breakfast table. He looked at me. His eyes were hard, intelligent, and filled with a terrible sorrow. Harper, he said, yes, if this comes out, will it hurt my son? He asked it plainly. He did not ask me to lie. He did not ask me to hide it, but the question hung there, heavy with the weight of a father's instinct to protect his child. No matter how grown, no matter how guilty. I looked at him. I thought about the easy charm Ethan had tried to use on me on the terrace. I thought about the way he had let my father humiliate me because it suited his timeline. I thought about Brooke, convinced she was living a fairy tale, unaware she was a human shield. I could have softened it. I could have said, maybe. I could have said we can manage the fallout. But Marin had hired me for the truth. I looked the senator in the eye. Truth hurts whoever has been using darkness as shelter. I said, the senator held my gaze. He nodded slowly. It was an acceptance. Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a specific pattern, 3 short pulses. It was Daria. Excuse me, Senator. I said, I need to take this. It concerns the investigation. He waved a hand, dismissing me, turning back to stare at the evidence of his son's betrayal. I stepped into the hallway. Closing the heavy door, I answered the phone. Brooks, I said. I ran the name. Daria said. Her voice was crisp, efficient, cutting through the emotional fog of the morning. I ran Robert Brooks through the secondary database, the one we do not share with the public, and, I asked, he is not a mastermind. Harper, she said, I found a flagged file from 18 months ago. The SEC looked at him for a pump-and-dump scheme involving penny stocks. They dropped it because there wasn't enough money involved to prosecute. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. He is small-time, I said. He is worse than small time, Daria said. He is a barnacle. The file shows a pattern going back 10 years. He attaches himself to anyone with a little bit of power, local councilmen, country club presidents, now a senator. He trades on their names without their permission. He promises access he does not have. He takes fees for introductions that never happen. I felt a wave of nausea. My father was not some great villain. He was something far more common and far more pathetic. He was a man who believed that proximity to power was a personality. He thought that if he stood next to important people, he became important by osmosis. He called you worthless, Daria said, her voice softening just a fraction. Because you were the only one who didn't reflect any light back onto him. You were quiet. You were private. You gave him nothing to brag about. To a man like that, utility is the only form of love. I hung up the phone. I stood in the hallway of the great estate, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who had built railroads and commanded armies, and I realized the tragedy of my family. We were not evil. We were just hollow. Brooke filled her hollowness with perfectionism. My father filled his with other people's status. And me, I had filled mine with secrets. I turned to go back into the study, but Marin Kincaid was standing there. She had come in from the terrace quietly. She held a glass of water, but she wasn't drinking it. She looked at the closed door of the study, then at me. "He knows," she said. "He knows." I confirmed. "About Ethan." "Yes." Marin let out a breath that sounded like a shudder. She walked over to a small side table and set the glass down. She adjusted a vase of flowers, her fingers moving with nervous, precise energy. "You have to understand something about us." "Harper," she said, keeping her back to me, "the Kincaid reputation is strong. It is built on 100 years of service and public trust. We can survive a lot of things. We have survived political attacks. We have survived market crashes." She turned to face me. Her eyes were dry, but they burned with a fierce, protective intensity. "But our tolerance for betrayal is zero," she said. She took a step closer to me. "Ethan thinks he is safe because he is blood," she said. "He thinks the wedding will protect him because we would never embarrass the family by canceling it. He thinks we will cover for him to save the election." She looked at the study door. "He is wrong," she said. I looked at this woman, this mother who was watching her son's life unravel, and I saw the steel that held the family together. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. Marin looked at me. "The senator is going to ask you for a recommendation," she said. "He respects you. He sees himself in you. He sees the integrity that his own son lacks." She paused. "The climax of this story is not about revenge." "Harper," she said, "you have the knife in your hand. You can cut everyone who hurt you. You can destroy your father. You can destroy Brooke's happiness. You can destroy Ethan. You can burn it all down and walk away warm." She waited, letting the words land. "But you have to decide if that is who you are." She said, "Are you the executioner, or are you the person who saves the patient by cutting out the tumor, even if it leaves a scar?" She did not wait for an answer. She turned and walked back toward the terrace, leaving me alone in the hallway. I stood there for a long moment. I thought about the timeline on the screen. I thought about the look on my father's face when the senator silenced him. I thought about Brooke's desperate confession that she had sold me out to buy her safety. I realized then that Marin was right. I had come here with a vague sense of vindication. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to know I had power. But now that I had the power, the taste of it was different than I expected. It did not taste like victory. It tasted like responsibility. I had the truth. The truth was a weapon. I could use it to humiliate them the way they had humiliated me. I could release the files. I could let the senator announce the cancellation of the wedding. I could watch my father crumble into nothingness. I could watch Brooke's world shatter. Or I could do something else. I put my hand on the doorknob of the study. The real reckoning was not about what they deserved. It was about what I could live with. I turned the handle and walked back into the room where the senator was waiting for my verdict. The wedding day arrived with the kind of aggressive perfection that only extreme wealth can manufacture. It was a Saturday in late October, and the weather had been bullied into submission. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue. The air was crisp but not cold, and the leaves on the trees surrounding the estate had turned a uniform shade of gold, as if they had been painted by a set designer. I drove through the gates at 2 p.m. The gravel driveway was now lined with black SUVs and hired security. The lawn where I had confronted my family 2 days ago had been transformed. A massive white tent, the size of a cathedral, rose up from the grass. It was open-sided, draped in silk and crystals, filled with 300 guests who were pretending that love was the same thing as strategy. I parked my car in the designated lot, far away from the valet chaos. I walked toward the house, my heels sinking slightly into the manicured turf. I was wearing a navy blue dress, severe and simple. I was not a bridesmaid. I was not part of the wedding party. I was something else entirely. I was the fuse. The atmosphere inside the house was frantic. Makeup artists were running through the halls with brushes like batons. Florists were shouting about hydration levels for the hydrangeas. But underneath the noise, there was a different frequency, a tension that hummed in the floorboards. My family found me within 5 minutes of my arrival, before the brunch. They would have ignored me. They would have placed me at a table near the kitchen and hoped I left early. But today, the dynamic had inverted. They had seen the senator usher me into his study. They had seen me walk out an hour later, looking calm while the senator looked grim. They did not know exactly what I had said or what I had found, but they knew the balance of power had shifted, and like all people who worship power, they were eager to be near the new source. "Harper," my mother cried out, rushing toward me across the foyer. She was wearing a mother-of-the-bride dress in silver that cost $4,000. She grabbed my hands, her palms damp. "You look beautiful, just beautiful. We were so worried you might be late." She squeezed my hands, her eyes searching mine for a clue, for reassurance. "Come," she said, pulling me toward the main salon. "Your father is dying to see you." I let her pull me. It was fascinating, in a morbid way, to watch them rewrite history in real time. 2 weeks ago, I was the embarrassment. Today, I was the asset. My father was standing near the bar, holding a tumbler of scotch. He was talking to a man I recognized as a federal judge. When he saw me, his face lit up with a performance of paternal pride that was so thick it was almost suffocating. "And here she is," my father boomed, interrupting the judge, "my daughter. Harper, she is consulting for the senator on some high-level security matters. Very hush-hush." He reached out an arm to drape around my shoulders. I stepped sideways, smooth and deliberate, leaving his arm hanging in the empty air. "Hello, Dad," I said. The judge looked at me with interest. "Is that so? The senator is a hard man to impress. You must be quite talented." "She is brilliant," my father said quickly, recovering his balance. "Always has been. We are very proud." He beamed at me, a desperate, sweating smile. He was using my name as a credential. He was trying to signal to the room that he was inside the circle, that his daughter was the senator's confidant, and therefore, he was safe. He was trying to use me as a shield against the very investigation I had launched. I looked at him, and I felt a wave of revulsion. He did not care about the crime. He did not care about the morality. He only cared that he might get caught. "I am just doing my job," I said to the judge, ignoring my father completely, before my father could spin another lie. Marin Kincaid materialized. She was wearing a structured gown of midnight blue. Her hair was perfect. Her jewelry was diamonds, cold and sharp. She moved through the crowd like a shark through water, silent and lethal. She stepped between my father and the judge. "Judge," she said smoothly, offering her hand. "It is so good to see you. Miles is looking for you in the library. He has a question about the appellate court ruling you wrote last month." The judge's eyes lit up. He excused himself instantly, eager to speak to the senator. Marin turned to my father. The smile she had worn for the judge vanished. Her face became a blank, polite mask, the kind a CEO wears when firing a junior executive. "Robert," she said. "Marin," my father said, his voice too loud. "Wonderful turnout. I was just telling the judge." "The ushers need you," Marin said, cutting him off. Her voice was low, but it had the force of a command. "There's an issue with the seating chart for your distant relatives. They are confused about where to go. We need you to handle them." My father blinked. "Oh, I am sure the planner can—" "No, Robert," Marin said. She took a step closer. "We need you to handle it. Now." She did not touch him. She did not raise her voice. She simply directed him away from the important guests, redirecting him like a staff member handling a disruption. She was quarantining him. She was making sure he could not embarrass the senator any further before the hammer dropped. My father looked at her, then at me. He saw the alignment. He saw that Marin and I were standing together, and he was on the outside. He swallowed hard, nodded, and walked away toward the back of the house. His shoulders slumped in his expensive suit. Marin did not watch him go. She looked at me. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I am ready," I said. She nodded. "The ceremony starts in 30 minutes. She turned and walked away. I wandered through the house. The air was thick with perfume and anticipation. I saw Ethan Kincaid standing near the French doors that led to the garden. He was surrounded by his groomsmen, who were laughing and drinking, but Ethan was not laughing. He was staring at his phone. His knuckles were white. He typed a message furiously, waited 10 seconds, then typed another. He looked up, scanned the room, and then disappeared into the corridor. I followed him, staying far enough back to be unseen. He ducked into a small alcove near the kitchen. I could hear his voice, low and urgent. "Julian, pick up the phone," he hissed. "Where are you? The transfer has not cleared. The auditor is asking questions about the timeline. You said it was handled. Call me back." He hung up. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect coif. He leaned his head against the wall and exhaled a long, shaky breath. His jaw was tight, grinding his teeth. He was terrified. He knew the money was stuck. He knew the deal was fragile. But he did not know that the auditor asking questions was me. He did not know that the person blocking the transfer was the senator himself, who had frozen the accounts 2 hours ago based on my report. Ethan straightened his tie, composed his face into a mask of joy, and walked back out to his wedding. I made my way to the bridal suite. The door was open. Inside, it was an explosion of white lace and nervous energy. Bridesmaids in pale pink were fluttering around, holding bouquets and fixing hemlines. Brooke stood in the center of the room. She looked radiant. The dress was a masterpiece of lace and silk, costing more than my annual salary used to be. Her hair was pinned up in an intricate style, and she wore the Kincaid family diamonds around her neck, but her eyes were haunted. She looked like someone standing on a stage she could not exit without losing everything. She looked like a woman who knew she was walking into a trap but was too afraid to stop moving. When she saw me, she froze. The bridesmaids sensed the tension and quieted down. "Can you give us a minute?" Brooke said to the room. The bridesmaids filed out, casting curious glances at me. The door clicked shut. We were alone. "You came," Brooke said. "I told you I would," I said. She walked over to the vanity and picked up a lipstick, turning it over and over in her hands. "Dad is acting like he won the lottery," she said quietly. "He thinks you fixed everything. He thinks you are his ticket to the inner circle. He is wrong," I said. Brooke looked at me in the mirror. Her reflection was pale. "Ethan is acting strange," she said. "He is jumpy. He keeps checking his phone. He told me it is just work stress." But she trailed off. She turned around to face me. "Harper," she said. Her voice trembled. "What did you find?" I looked at my sister. This was the moment. I could tell her. I could warn her. I could tell her that her fiancé was a thief, and that her marriage was a merger designed to hide a crime. I could save her from the humiliation of the ceremony, but if I told her now, she would scream, she would cry, she would cause a scene that would alert Ethan. And if Ethan knew the game was up, he might run, he might transfer the remaining assets, he might destroy the evidence that the senator needed to secure the conviction. The senator had been clear. The ceremony happens. We keep them in the room. We close the trap when everyone is accounted for. I cannot tell you. Brooke, I said. She stared at me. Tears welled up in her eyes, threatening to ruin her perfect makeup. Please, she whispered, if you do this today, if you ruin this for me, you will destroy me. This is all I have. Harper, I am not smart like you. I do not have a career. I have this. I have him. She took a step toward me, clutching her dress. Do not destroy me, she begged. I looked at her, and I felt a pang of pity, but it was distant. It was the pity you feel for a bird that has flown into a glass window. I am not destroying you. Brooke, I said. Then what are you doing? She cried. I am refusing to be your lie. I said. I turned and walked out of the bridal suite. I heard her sob once, a sharp, choked sound. Before the door closed behind me, I walked out to the tent. The guests were taking their seats. It was a sea of designer hats and dark suits. A string quartet was playing Pachelbel's Canon. I found my seat. It was in the third row, on the bride's side. My parents were in the front row, looking stiff and proud. My father was waving at people. My mother was dabbing her eyes. I looked across the aisle. The senator was sitting in the front row on the groom's side. He was perfectly still. He was not smiling. He was not looking at the guests. He was watching the altar. I noticed the security detail. They were moving differently today. Usually, at an event like this, they stood at the perimeter, looking outward for threats. Today, they were inside the tent. They were positioned at the exits. They were looking inward. They were looking at the front row. They were not there to protect the family. They were there to contain them. Ethan walked down the aisle. He looked handsome, dashing, the perfect prince. He smiled at the guests, but his eyes kept darting to the back of the tent, looking for Julian Vance. Julian was there, sitting 3 rows behind the senator. He looked relaxed. He looked smug. He winked at Ethan as he passed. Ethan let out a breath, visibly relaxing. He thought he was safe. He thought the money had moved. He thought the wedding was his alibi. The music changed. The guests stood up. Brooke appeared at the entrance of the tent. She was stunning. She walked down the aisle on my father's arm. My father was beaming, his chest puffed out, radiating triumph. He thought this was his coronation. He thought he had won. Brooke did not smile. She looked at Ethan with a desperate, pleading intensity. She was marching toward her future, hoping that if she just kept moving, the ground wouldn't open up beneath her. I watched them. I watched the performance. I watched the lie parade itself in silk and lace. They reached the altar. My father kissed Brooke on the cheek and handed her to Ethan. He sat down, adjusting his suit jacket, looking around the room to make sure everyone had seen him. The officiant began to speak. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. The words floated over the crowd. Beautiful, perfect, timeless. I sat with my hands folded in my lap. I felt the hard drive in my purse, heavy against my leg. I looked at the senator. He caught my eye. He gave a microscopic nod. The ceremony continued. Vows were exchanged. Rings were slipped onto fingers. Promises of eternity were made by people who were measuring their lives in fiscal quarters, and I realized that the real explosion was not happening now. They were going to let them say, I do. They were going to let the knot be tied. They were going to let the trap snap shut completely. The explosion was being held until the last possible second. Everyone was smiling. The camera flashes were popping. The floor was cracking. And I was the only one who was not afraid to fall. The reception was a masterpiece of orchestrated joy. A 12-piece band played swing music on a stage draped in white orchids. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne that never seemed to empty. My father was holding court near the dance floor, laughing loudly, his face flushed with the triumph of a man who believes he has finally arrived. He clinked glasses with donors. He whispered in the ears of councilmen. He looked at the tent, at the crowd, at the senator's family, and he saw a reflection of his own greatness. I stood near the periphery. Holding a glass of sparkling water I had no intention of drinking, I watched them dance. I watched Brooke swirling in her white dress, her smile fixed and brittle, like a piece of china that had been glued back together one too many times. A hand touched my elbow. I turned to see the senator's chief of security. He did not smile. "Ms. Brooks," he said, his voice low enough to be lost under the brass section of the band. "The senator is ready for you now." He led me away from the noise, away from the celebration, and back toward the house. The music faded with every step we took, replaced by the heavy, solemn silence of the estate. We walked down the hallway to the library. The security guard opened the door. "Let me inside," and closed it behind me with a click that sounded like a seal breaking. Senator Miles Kincaid was standing by the window, looking out at the darkened lawn where his guests were celebrating a union built on fraud. He turned when I entered. He had removed his tuxedo jacket. He looked tired, stripped of the public persona, left only with the weary gravity of a man who has seen too much of the world to be surprised by it. "Please, sit down. Harper," he said. I sat in the leather chair opposite his desk. The room was dim, lit only by a green banker's lamp. The folder I had given him earlier lay closed on the desk. "I want to thank you," he said, "not for coming, but for the work. I had my team review your findings independently while the ceremony was taking place, and," I asked. He looked me in the eye. "They confirmed everything, the shell companies, the kickbacks, the timeline. Your work is impeccable. It is forensic art." I nodded. Saying nothing, "I am drafting a new piece of legislation." He continued, "It involves the creation of a civilian oversight panel for nonprofit financial conduct. It is going to be unpopular with my donors. It is going to be difficult to pass. I need people on that panel who are immune to intimidation and who do not care about being liked." He leaned forward. "I want you on that panel. Harper." I looked at him, surprised. "Senator, I do not live in D.C. I am not a political appointee. I do not want a politician," he said sharply. "I want a hunter. I want someone who looks at a balance sheet and sees the moral failure underneath the math. I am offering you a position, not as a favor, not because of your family, but because you earned it." He paused, and his voice softened, carrying a weight that I felt in my chest. "Your daughter is the kind of person this country depends on," he said, though he was speaking to the room, to the ghost of the father I wished I had, not for prestige, for integrity. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "Thank you." "Senator," I said, "I accept." "Good," he said. "Now, we have the unpleasant business to attend to." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Send him in." The door opened. Ethan walked in. He was smiling, holding a glass of scotch, looking like the prince of the evening. "Dad," he said, stepping into the room, "you are missing the toasts. The best man is about to." He stopped. He saw me sitting in the chair. He saw the folder on the desk. He saw the look on his father's face. The smile vanished. It slid off his face like oil off water. "What is going on?" Ethan asked, his voice tightening. "Sit down." "Ethan," the senator said. Ethan looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "Why is she here?" "Because she knows," the senator said. "Knows what?" Ethan said, trying to laugh. He took a sip of his drink, but his hand was shaking. "This is ridiculous. Harper, if you are trying to stir up drama because you were left out of the bridal party. Honestly, it is pathetic." The senator picked up the folder and tossed it across the desk. It landed in front of Ethan with a heavy thud. "It is over," the senator said. "The Blue Water accounts, the transfer to Project Janus, the kickbacks to Robert Brooks. We have it all." Ethan stared at the folder. He did not open it. He knew what was inside. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking young and terrified. Dad, he started, his voice cracking. It was just a bridge loan. I was going to pay it back. The development is solid. We just had a liquidity issue. You stole $2 million from a charity that feeds veterans, the senator said. His voice was not loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. And you used your wedding as a smokescreen to hide the transaction dates. Ethan stood up. He began to pace. He looked at me with pure venom. You did this. He spat at me. You hacked my accounts. That is illegal. I could sue you. You could, I said calmly, but then you would have to explain to a jury why you were paying my father a consulting fee for a project he knows nothing about. Ethan turned to his father, switching tactics instantly. He went from aggression to bargaining. Dad, please, we can fix this. I can move the money back. I have investors lined up. If we just wait a week, no one has to know. The wedding. Think about the wedding. Think about the press. If this comes out, it destroys the campaign. The senator looked at his son. He looked at him with a profound disappointment that was worse than anger. The campaign is not what I am worried about, the senator said. I am worried about the fact that you are standing here, trying to negotiate with the truth. The door opened again. Brooke stood there. She was holding her veil in one hand. She looked at Ethan, sweating and pale. She looked at the senator, stone-faced. She looked at me. She walked into the room. She did not ask what was happening. She looked at the folder on the desk. Is it true? She asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. Brooke, baby, Ethan said, reaching for her. It is a misunderstanding. Harper is confusing some business details. Stop, Brooke said. She stepped back, revulsion on her face. Stop lying. Just for once. Stop lying. She looked at me. You told me you were refusing to be my lie. She said to me, this is what you meant. Yes, I said. She looked at Ethan. She looked at the man she had married less than 2 hours ago. She saw the fear in his eyes, the guilt, and she realized that every compliment, every gift, every moment of their courtship had been a calculation. I am a distraction, she whispered. I am just a pretty thing you put in front of the camera so no one would look at the bank account. Ethan tried to grab her hand. Brooke, that is not true. I love you. Brooke pulled her hand away. She took off the massive diamond ring. She placed it on the senator's desk. Next to the file of evidence, I am done, she said. Suddenly, the hallway outside erupted in noise. I demand to know where she is. My father's voice boomed. The door flew open. My father stormed in. He was red-faced, furious, a glass of scotch splashing over the rim of his tumbler. He saw the scene, the senator. Ethan, Brooke crying, me sitting calmly. He zeroed in on me. There you are, he shouted. I knew it. I knew you would try to ruin this. He turned to the senator, putting on his best aggrieved father performance. Senator, I am so sorry. I tried to keep her away. She is having an episode. She is jealous. She cannot stand to see her sister happy. I will take her home immediately. He reached for my arm. Come on. Harper, get up. You have done enough damage. I did not move. I did not flinch. Robert, the senator said. My father stopped, his hand hovering inches from my arm. Yes, Senator, I apologize. I know how embarrassing this is. The senator stood up. He walked around the desk. He towered over my father. The only embarrassment in this room, Robert, is you, the senator said. My father blinked, confused. Excuse me. Your daughter did not ruin this wedding, the senator said. My son did, and you helped him. My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish. What? I do not understand. We know about the payments, the senator said. We know about the fees you took for introductions you never made. We know you sold my name to half of Naperville for $10,000 a pop. My father went pale. He looked at Ethan for help, but Ethan was staring at the floor. But that was consulting. My father stammered. I was helping. I was part of the team. You were a pawn, the senator said coldly. Ethan used you because he knew you were desperate to feel important. And you were so eager to be close to power that you didn't even realize you were being an accomplice to a crime. My father looked at me. He looked at the daughter he had spent 30 years ignoring. He looked at the woman he had called worthless in front of his entire family. He saw me sitting there, respected by the man he worshipped, holding the power he craved. The senator took a step closer to my father. "You called her worthless at dinner," the senator said. His voice was a blade. "Marin told me. You called her worthless because she did not fit your picture of success." My father looked down. I was stressed. "You called her worthless," the senator continued. "Relentless, because you do not recognize value unless it impresses you. You do not see integrity. You do not see intelligence. You only see mirrors that reflect your own ego. And because she refused to be a mirror, you tried to break her." The room was silent. The truth hung in the air, undeniable and devastating. My father looked at me. For the first time in his life, he saw me. He saw the strength I had built in the silence. He saw the competence. He saw the reality that I had outgrown him a long time ago. "Harper," he whispered. His voice was shaking. I didn't know." It was the only apology he had left. It was an admission of ignorance. He was admitting that he had never bothered to know his own child. I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I picked up my purse. I walked over to him. I looked him in the eye. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt free. "That is the point, Dad," I said. I turned to the senator. "I will send over the final paperwork on Monday," I said. He nodded. "Thank you." "Harper." I walked to the door. I passed Brooke, who was weeping silently. I passed Ethan, who was staring into the abyss of his own making. I walked out of the library. I walked down the hall, past the portraits of strangers. I walked out the front door, leaving the music and the laughter and the lies behind me. The night air was cold and clean. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my heels. I got in. I turned the key. I drove out of the gates, past the security guards, past the high fences. I turned onto the highway, heading back toward Chicago, back to my quiet apartment, back to my job that mattered, back to my life. I was not vindicated. Vindication implies that I needed their approval to be right. I was not forgiven, because I had done nothing wrong. I was free. I had chosen a life where love was not conditional, where worth was not a debate, and where the only person I needed to impress was the woman in the mirror. And as the city skyline appeared on the horizon, glittering like a promise, I knew that for the first time in my life, I was finally going home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Kate Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.